Oh, yeah, it's got a red light when it's not working. Awesome. But yeah, my name's Westin, here to talk to y'all about TypeScript, save you from stories of Peter's flights, of which he has many. Title of my talk is TypeScript, How I Learned to Love My JavaScript. More importantly, I kind of view this as types, how I learned to love my job. I don't care what type system you're using, as long as there's types, I'm probably very happy. It makes my life a lot easier as an engineer, and hopefully makes everyone reading my code's life a lot easier later on. So what I wanted to do was walk you through a scenario, a fictitious scenario, but one that you might have found yourself in some similarities with. But let's imagine that we started a new job at a mapping company of some kind, maybe Apple or Google or something of that nature. And you come in on your first day and no onboarding. Your product team comes to you and says, we want to know how to get from Sprout Social, my current employer, to the Chicago JS conference. And then maybe later they're going to want directions to ReasonConf in October. Everyone should check that out. So if you aren't aware of it, look into it. Sounds awesome. We'll get directions there later. So the product team asked me to make a map. So this is what they show me they want. And we can see the green line kind of represents the walking directions I might take. And this big purple radius around it, this opaque circle, represents how far I'm willing to walk before I decide to give up and call an Uber, because it's just way too much exercise for me, and that's not something I like to do. This is what we want to build. We want to figure out how we can build this. So we see that this fictitious company has a map package already available in their GitHub. See how to install it. We see a little bit of a usage instructions in the code block right here. So let's just go ahead, run this in the editor, and hopefully we should have a map. But here with the code next to the browser, we can see that we don't have a map. We actually just have a runtime error. So that's okay. The runtime error seems pretty well described. An API access token is required to use map. So I can just go ahead, find a runtime, find a token. I'm a little bummed out because first thing I did broke, but that's okay. I didn't ship it to anyone just yet. So I add the token. Now I have a map, and feels great. I'm step 1, 100% done. One step closer to collecting some money, hopefully. So I go back to the README because now I know that maybe I have some past experience with maps, but I know that I need to know when the map is loaded, like when all these tiles come in that represent the street names and the buildings and all the fancy stuff that hopefully we're getting for free. So I scroll down in the README, and I see there is some API documentation, bare bones, but it's there. And there's an on function on the map class, and it looks like it takes an event and a function as parameters. I don't really know what event is, but I'm going to take a wild guess that it's probably a string maybe, and hopefully the load event is a string that I'm familiar with, maybe onload, maybe load. Try a few. Load seems to work. I get a console log. Feels okay. Took a little guesswork, but it wasn't impossible. So then I want to add a layer. And I know I want to add a layer because with maps, the lines and these circles are just typically referred to as like polygons to render on the map. So when I look at the API docs, I see add layer, adds a layer such as a polygon to the screen. So that sounds like what I want. Unfortunately, I really don't know anything about layer, which is the first parameter to add layer. So I don't know if it's an object, is it a class, is it a string, is it a number? I mean, I don't know what a number would be as a layer anyways, so it's a little confusing. I don't know anyone yet. Maybe I'm not even sure who built map. So I'm going to look at the source code a little bit, kind of dive through it. Map source codes are typically very large. Turns out it's not an easy task. And I see the add layer function, and it picks off a couple properties from the layer. So I can say, like, oh, it probably has a type, and passes it to some style layer, which extends an evented class. And I see it, oh, it's looking at it, and it has a zoom, max zoom, min zoom, metadata. Don't know what metadata is. It's very overwhelming. So maybe the README has something else. So I'm going to hit the README. Oh, this is great. Peter built it. In 2015, not too long ago. I don't see him. Maybe I can find him. Maybe he remembers. I doubt it. It's 2019 now. Is it 2020? It's been a while. You know what? I'm not happy anymore. I'm especially not happy at Peter because he totally forgot to document this. So I just basically have to track him down, figure out what's going on, work with him for a while. He's a nice guy. Hopefully he can help me. And at this point, I'm probably going to go to him and say, you know what, Peter, can you just send me a gist or a code snippet on Slack and just let me paste it in? Like, I put a lot of effort into this so far, and I don't have a big return. So then I get my line, and I'm just going to go ahead and call it quits. I'll walk wherever I have to walk. I won't call an Uber. Product's done. So it was kind of a frustrating experience, a little bit of a contrived example. But what I want to explore is how this might have been different had we done TypeScript or static typing of some kind. So still trying to build the exact same thing, directions from Sprout Social to cars.com here, put a radius around it of however far you're willing to walk. For me, it's a mile, which isn't true. So I'm going to go through that first example again. I went to the README, I copy and paste the code in the usage example, straight into my editor. I didn't run it yet, but my editor immediately greets me with feedback, which is great. So I peek into the feedback, and it's an error message. And inside this error message, I see property access token is missing in type. Awesome. I didn't have to run or build anything. Maybe my package building step is nowhere near as easy. So this saves me a ton of time, hopefully. And also, I didn't leave my editor, which is very nice. So how did this happen? So turns out there's a config object type for the map, this geomap class that is passed into the constructor, and it is here. It's an access token, which says it's a string. It's a container that says it's a string, style, string, some center point, which is an array of 2 numbers, and zoom, which is a number. So I can kind of see this, and I might not know exactly where to get the access token, but now I know I need it. I know what it roughly should look like, and I know what the entire argument that I'm passing into the constructor should roughly look like. And once I have this type laid out in my in-class geomap, it's quite easy to add this to the constructor. I can have the parameters say config, geomap config, and TypeScript just kind of takes it from here. Now, if anyone tries to call this with the wrong object, TypeScript is hopefully going to give them some feedback about what went wrong. Maybe they added a new parameter, maybe they typoed something, maybe they forgot access token. Pretty easy to do. I forgot it as well. So back to kind of this load function, or this on function that I passed the string load. I didn't really know what the string was supposed to be, but I had a rough idea that it should be something like load. Maybe this could have been easier with TypeScript, and it can. As I'm typing map.on, I get a little pop-up in my IDE that says the event is of type geomap event types. So I can click into that, still in my editor, and see that this geomap event types is what's called a union type. It can be load or unload or mouse down or mouse up or click or double click and probably a million others. But I can see what values are available. So the union type kind of specifies with these pipes and sigils that it could be this. I like to think of it like or sometimes, which is a simplification, but it could be load or unload or mouse down. Like I said, it's a simplification, but it makes it easy to kind of, when you see that, it looks a lot like an or and an if statement. So next, we had that mysterious layer that I had no idea what to do with, and then I got frustrated and asked for a copy-paste. Here I can see a little bit more about layer now, because I can go to its type definition in my editor, and I see that it's a geomap layer config type, and it takes an ID, a type, I see layout, which references another type. I see this object source that references other types, and I see an object paint. It doesn't paint the whole picture for me, but I'm a heck of a lot closer than a total guess. So now I can actually dig into each of these types and figure out what this whole structure starts to unfold to. And I can hopefully have my line layer. So this is kind of where we ended with without TypeScript, but we can see that it's less daunting at this point. And if we dive into kind of the pieces of that layer config, we can see that there were some things that we haven't run across just yet. If you see on line 52 there's layout has that question mark next to it. What that means is it's optional. I don't have to pass a layout. So I know from experience that the layout is what will make those caps on the lines rounded. I can pass in a string rounded to that. But you know what? I didn't like the way it looked. So I didn't pass in anything for layout dot like line cap or something. I forget the exact parameter or object key. But I can just not pass layout at all because the optional type says it doesn't have to be there. And TypeScript's okay with that. It knows that it didn't have to be there. If I add it, it will type check it, but I don't have to add it at all. I also have types inside of types. Types all the way down. So you can see on line 52, again, layout is actually, if I do provide it, I must provide type geomap_paint. Should say layout, actually. But down on 57, there's paint. So I could say type geomap_paint. Paint's actually required because the map needs to know what color to draw the polygon, and we'll pretend that every polygon must have a color. And we see source could have been a type in and of itself, but instead, since source was small, the author decided, well, I'll just put the keys here in line, save you a couple scrolls or jumps around. But source could easily be abstracted into a type as well. And then we're also seeing something on line 54, source types, and that's kind of interesting. So what we're gonna, layer types, what we'll see is that you can also do enums. So we can say, similar to union where you can pass in one of these values, it also is represented in the code, however, and not just in the type system. So now when I do a layer type, I can say in the type, I can say it's of type layer type, or I can say even more specifically it's of layer type dot fill, but also in the code I can use this. So in my map onload function, I actually had the type of the layer is layer type dot line. So this enum kind of goes past just the type system and also works in your code. Like you can use it as a value. It's the string line, but it's also a type. So that's quite handy. And if you have experience with Flow, you might have had a more roundabout way to make these enums. TypeScript is really nice in that. It makes it a little bit more convenient. And then the circle config is quite interesting because there's some third-party usage here. The layers look roughly the same. You can see the paint. But point and circle are both third-party libraries that happen to use TypeScript, so maybe another library at the company. These are actually from turf.js, so maybe I npm install this. I pass the point, the function to create a new point, I pass it a string ASDF by accident. It tells me, hey, type string is not assignable to number. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I fat-fingered that or something, but I know that point only takes numbers, and I can dive into its type definition. So TypeScript is even helping me with other people's code, my own code, code from NPM. And then the final topic was advanced unions. And this is kind of a more, it's a situation I think that comes up pretty quickly when you're doing types, but you can also kind of have this type of polymorphism with your types. So I'm really glad for the talk before mine. And we learned a little bit about polymorphism. This is such a way that like we can say geomap source data, it has a type field that differentiates it from every other geomap source data. So one might be a background, one might be a heat map. We can use that type key to differentiate from what the different optional values can be, and they can have different data underneath. So that way, and it's called guarding when you check that type. So if I go in here and I say, I want to console.log the fill of a layer, if the layer type is background, I can console.log fill, and TypeScript's happy because the fill type specified in its signature that it had, or the layer type background specified it had a fill in its signature, but heat map doesn't have a fill. So we see that I actually get an error because TypeScript's smart enough to know in this event, this specific variant of this type when it's a heat map doesn't actually have a fill. So that's kind of how things could have unfolded in a nicer way with TypeScript, and still got me to the end product. A couple hot tips that I have for you all as you get into types, be it Flow, Reason, TypeScript, any system you would like to use. I like to joke at work a lot that we don't do TDD in test-driven development fashion, but we do type-driven development. It's often really nice to start with your types first. We've found some great successes at Sprout Social and doing that. Don't overuse optionals. An object where every key is optional is not always super helpful. Carefully choose when to use unions. A union of if a parameter can be number or string or object or null or undefined might not be the most best use case for typing. You might want to rethink some things and see if you can tighten that up a bit. And then my favorite piece of advice is, and you can take it with a grain of salt as you get started using types, if it's hard to type check, you should kind of stop and ask yourself, is this code hard to understand as well? Because often when it's hard to type check, it's indicative that the code might actually just be kind of confusing code, and you might be able to tighten it up a little bit and make it more understandable for people reading it. So that's all I have to say about TypeScript. I wanted to make sure to thank a couple people that helped me along the way. Peter and Mike, obviously, for setting this up. Types. Shane's here in the audience. He helped me out with the slides. Mapbox.gl is what that map was rendered with. Turf does points and circles and all of the polygons you could ever imagine. And then Code Sandbox, just because it was a nice environment to use where TypeScript's just set up for me and I don't have to download anything. So, thank you.